Okay, so the goal here is to set up some static pages. I'll go to my localhost 3000. This is the Hogwarts website. And what I want to add is I want, at least initially, the ability to say something like /about, or maybe /pages/about. The route doesn't necessarily matter. Those are pretty flexible to change in Rails, and have it show an about page, or pages/contact and have it show a contact page, or even something along the lines of like pages/some numeric value and have it pull from the database some content that exists in a row in a pages table. So I'll do the simplest thing that works to begin with is I will just have /pages/about, and we could even alias that so that it could have an even cleaner URL to be just /about or about us. And we'll display just static HTML at that page, and then we'll modify it or add some extra provisions to put the database into place. So to do this, I need a controller, and so I'm going to generate a controller from the command line, and that's with my Rails G controller is what I want to generate. I'm going to call it pages. And the only reason I'm calling it pages is that I'm thinking forward to a future when I might have a pages table, and typically in a Rails environment it's not a requirement, but we often have our controllers named after the tables that they sort of display. And then I'll just hit enter there. In the past, when I generated a controller, I sometimes had it build out views and actions for me, so I could say like, oh, I know I want a about page or something like that, but I want to show you like doing it all from scratch. So I'll just say Rails G controller pages, and I'll hit enter. And there is my pages controller, and it also made a views folder for me. So I could, within my app controllers folder, pull up that controller. It's just an empty controller right now. And in the views pages subfolder there, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it about.html.erb. And then from Git, I can stage all of those new files, and then just say added a pages controller with an about view. Control enter. The about page, this is going to be something simple. It might just have an H2 that says like about Hogwarts, and then within here, this is the content of the about page. This is even more content in the about page. Very simple static HTML, no ERB. Even though I've named it html.erb, I don't have to include any embedded Ruby if I don't want to. Just like with PHP documents, they can just be HTML. They don't have to include PHP tags. The pages controller can actually be left blank. And so if we don't need to do anything for the about action, we could leave it off, but I typically put an empty action into the controller. So I'm going to put an action called about, which when executed will automatically load up that about page. It's not a requirement, I just do it because I tend to, when I come to a new Rails project, I tend to get the lay of the land by looking at the routing file first, and then I sort of peek through all the controllers. And if there's views that aren't being mentioned in the controllers, then I'll probably miss them, because I don't usually go and look through all the separate views folders, at least initially. I'd like to get a quick overview from the controllers and the routes. So here I would just put renders the app views pages about.html.erb. That's an automatic thing based on naming. All that's left is a route. And that I need my routing file for, so I can hit Control P and I can say config routes and hit enter. And I get my routing file. And I can make a manual route for this. I could say, let's show this page when a GET request is made to /pages/about. That should go to the pages controller's about action. That's one way of setting up that route. And as I mentioned, if I wanted a bit of a cleaner route, something maybe easier to remember, I could just do that. And in fact, I could leave both of those in and they could both route to the same thing. I probably wouldn't in a production app leave both of those in. Nobody really knows how the Google search engine ranking works at a specific level, but there's theories that if you have like duplicate content across multiple pages on the site, you could be potentially downgraded or punished for that, or it might just not count towards the indexing of how Google sees your site. So I probably wouldn't have multiple about pages in that way, but it's possible. At this point, if you're on Vagrant, you'd need to restart your server because we've added a controller and modified a route, two things that the server would need to be restarted for. I should be able to just go here though and try both those routes out. So /pages about. About Hogwarts, this is the content. Notice it's in the context of the layout that I had created for the whole application. So it still has the copyright message and the header up at the top, contents in the middle. Just /about should also work. If I wanted to link to this page, I will just pick one of these to hang around. If I wanted to link to this page, I need to give it a name, and this is something I haven't shown you yet in the routing. So when we create manual routes, we can give the route path a name, and that can be used with the link to helper to link to that particular route. And so I could say as about. So we name it with an as. And then if I wanted to now modify my layout so that it always linked to the about page, I could do so now. And so I can hit Control P to bring up my fuzzy finder. I want to open up the layout. So that's View, Layout, Application. So right now up in that header, we have the H1. And below that in the header, I could just put a paragraph tag. Get rid of that trailing thing with a link to in it. So I could do an ERB tag. I could link to, let's say, about us. That'll be the text. And then I should be able to just say about path there. And this about matches not the view, not the action, but it's this thing right here. They all happen to be the same word, but the connection that Rails is making internally is the as for the route referred to with here as the path. So let me just make sure this works and then I'll come back to the code. About us, I'm already on the About Us page, so I'll navigate away and then I'll try it out. Click it, and it works. The nice thing about having a named route like that is if I did change it, like say I for some kind of business reason, I changed this to like best path ever /about, because I given it a name and I'm referring to it by name here, I don't need to change anything else. Right, so I don't need to ever change my view code, even if the routing changes, I shouldn't have a slash in front of it, but even if the routing changes, you should be able to just go through here, to go back to the home page. The path, if you look down at the bottom there, is the correct path, and if I click on it, it goes to the best path ever /about. So that's a really nice feature with routing, is if you name them and then refer to them by name in your views, you can change the routes later on without having to modify the views later on. And that's just one of the various sort of, I guess, not really conventions, but one of the things that Rails often strives for is that changes in one part of your code shouldn't force you to change things elsewhere in your code, right? It tries to reduce the amount of coupling between your models, your views, and your controllers so that you don't have those kind of spooky interactions where you change one thing over here and other things break over there. So that's a very simple static page, static to the point where you have to edit this HTML document to change the contents. Sometimes that's okay, right? If it's a website that you're making and you're okay with going in and modifying the HTML and republishing the app, fair enough. If it is something where you want this page to be a little bit more flexible, you want the content of the page to be stored in a database, we could make a few modifications to make that happen. We'll need a new model and a database table for that. So I can go to the command prompt here. Should probably see if there's some getting in order. So what have I done since I last gitted? I added the page itself and the link. So git add, git commit. Fully added the static about page. And then from the command line, I can do a Rails generate for a model, and this time it's a page model that I want. And I'm going to give the model 3 properties. I'm going to give it a title, which will be a string, content, which will be text, and something called a permalink, which will be a string, and it'll also get an ID and the created at and updated at timestamps. Yep.
What's the difference between a string and text?
That what ends up in the database. So at like a MySQL or Postgres level, a string will be a varchar of maximum length 255, and text will be of type text, so like a text blob with no maximum size. So you really can't go wrong with text, but if you know that you're gonna need less space, you can use string. Okay, DB migration, right? So I've created a model, there's a migration file waiting to be migrated. So a Rails DB migrate will do that. If you're Googling around on the internet, and you sometimes will come across older Rails help, and it'll talk about rake DB migrate. So there used to be 2 command line tools that we used, Rails and rake. And people would always get confused when they were new to Rails, like which one to use. And so now everything goes through Rails, and the things that actually need to get shuffled off to rake, Rails just sort of shuffles them off to the rake command. And so, so you might see that in your travels, but they're the same thing. I now have a pages table. I always have my console running. This is a Rails console or a Rails C running. I can now hit reload in it, and I should be able to like generate a new page. So I could say like make an about page, create, give it a title, about us, give it some content. This is the content of the page built in the console. I think I used double quotes. And a permalink about, will this blow up in my face? Let's see. Oh, I've used the wrong quote somewhere. Sometimes you get stuck in ERB, and it's letting me know that I have an unmatched quote open. with this little tiny indicator, that little dash there, and the fact that normally the ERB prompt ends in a 0, and now it's ending in a 1, meaning it's waiting for more information, and it's because I mismatched my quotes. So I've just broken this. I'll have to like close that quote, and now it'll just syntax error, which is fine. I can go back. No, I'll just redo it all. Close you up. Okay, so let's try that again. Page.create, title, about us, content. This is the content from the console, period. Single quote, permalink. It's sort of awkward that it all sort of scrolls in one single line. About. That worked. I now have a page in the database, in the pages table. And now if I wanted to, I will repurpose the same controller that I'm working with, the pages controller. And for it, I will make a show action in which I load up a page from the page model, finding an ID from the params hash, remembering that the params hash is like the combined get superglobal and post superglobal in PHP. So I'm expecting that this controller action is being triggered by a route that includes a placeholder where the primary key of the page that I want to be loaded is going to be in that URL. And then in my route, I can leave this old one in here. Let's put this in and just call this like static about. And then here I can say resources, pages, referencing the pages controller, and I can specify which of the RESTful routes that I want Rails to build for me. I only need a show route. That will build up a route of this form. This one was the one I did as the example for students. A similar route is going to be built when I ask for the show route for pages. I get request to /pages/ID placeholder will be the generated route. That will route to this controller action. I now need a view because at the end of here, it'll render the app views pages show.html.erb. So I need that file to exist, and so I can go to that pages and make that file exist. And it's just going to be the fact that inside of an h2, I can take the page variable and output its title. And then maybe inside of like a div, maybe for styling purposes, I take the page contents. I call it contents, I think so. Let me see. I called it content, okay. That should all be linked up now. I've got a route from this resources pages only show. That routes to the pages controller show action, which loads up the page by ID in here. I then get transferred over to here and display that. So back over here, if I went to pages/1, we get our About Us page where the content was coming from the console, which was then saved in the database. Yeah?
Okay, so the example you did with the permalink for the About page, where you set what it would be, how would you do something where, let's say, you get the ID of the page, but in the permalink, it would display like the title?
So like here.
Yeah, so that would say About Us instead of 1.
Yeah, so I'd have to change it slightly for it to be set to about us, because right now I have it set to, I do have a permalink saved in the database with it, so I sort of thought that someone was going to ask this. And so I have about, we could change that to like about underscore us or about dash us. And if we wanted to use the permalink instead, that's when we're going to step outside the bounds of the RESTful routing system, which again is fine. And I could say like, I get requests to slash, I'll do it in 2 steps. First I'll do slash pages slash permalink, and then we'll see if we can just get it to be just straight up slash permalink. I want that to go to the pages permalink helper. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so now I have a new route, goes to pages permalink. I need a permalink here. I'm getting a permalink from the params hash, so I can do something really similar here, but instead of finding by ID, I can find by the permalink column permalink. And then, you know, I could go and create like a view that's exactly the same as the show view, or I could just use that other view. So I could just say like render show, and that will render the view associated with the show. So I can repurpose that view so I don't have to create 2 views that look exactly the same. And so this should work. Let's go see if it does. I'm a little worried that I've done something wrong in that this is going to give me a slash pages slash ID. This is going to give me a slash pages. This one will probably win in that I'll never actually get to this one. So we could like, I'll just cheat for now and I'll just call it slash P so that I'm not stepping on the toes of the route that's generated here. I would probably, if I was doing this, only implement this in one way. And so I wouldn't have to you know, do this. Well, let's see if this will be a working thing. So I should be able to go to slash P slash about, and that works. And then let's see if I can make that route work to the point where it's just permalinks. So if you don't ask for anything, will that work? Maybe just about. That works. The problem is now is like I had another route in my system that was like slash students. Is that now going to be taken to be a permalink and have it try to load up a students? No, that's nice. And the reason though for that is because routes are going to be processed in order. And so it'll come across these first. If I had put this command up at the top of the file, then it would have broken everything. But having it down below is fine. And so now I can have a page in the database and yet still have a nice clean URL that doesn't have numbers in it, which is, you know, usually if you're working with someone from marketing and you want to tell them that, oh yeah, the about page is going to be up at slash pages slash 1, they're going to be like, come on, we don't want that for our URL, right? So this is a nice cleaner way of getting the URL up there.
And just to clarify, the reason the pages and slash 1 goes to about pages because the about page has an ID of 1.
You got it. Yeah, you got it. So now I could have multiple pages in the system, and yeah, each of them would have a different ID, and each of them could have a different permalink, and I could refer to them either by ID, by going to the pages, or by permalink, by just typing the permalink there. I could change which permalink worked for a particular page, and so if I went and I loaded up the first page, and I changed its permalink to about dash us, and then saved it. About shouldn't work anymore. I need some I need some code in here to like catch the fact that when a page isn't found, not to try to display it. And then about us. And so if I did want a little bit of code in there to fix, like when permalinks don't exist, I could have like a if page is nil, I think. Would that be a thing? When it's not there, when the page doesn't exist, yeah, it's nil. Undefined method title for nil class. So I could say like if page.nil redirect to the root path, the root URL, else render show. And so that should be like a little bit of a guard now, so that if someone puts in a permalink that is not in my database, I just get redirected back to the home page. If it is a thing in my database, I get it displayed. Back to here quickly. Redirect to is a nice little helper that you can use. When we mention paths inside of link to, we always say like the name of the path underscore path. When we redirect to them, we say the name of the thing underscore URL. And so that was the little helper that went into action there. So 3 different ways of displaying static and or semi-static pages. Directly just having the view and the hard-coded data in there like we did with the about. And for that, we just had a route that just routed to that exact action by name. It's a bit of extra work there. The second possibility was having like a show view that loaded up data, found that data by ID, and had a single member route to route to that. And then the very last possibility was having this permalink controller action. This was dependent on the fact that my model had a permalink column in it that I could save these permalinks to, these sort of friendly links, friendly URLs, and then having a route where any placeholder, so a slash anything that doesn't match any of the previous resources, will try going to the page's permalink controller action, try loading that page up by permalink. If it doesn't exist, redirecting, and if it does exist, displaying. Any other questions or comments about those style of static pages, or those 3 styles of static pages? And again, I should just reiterate the fact that I have all 3 of these different styles in the same app is not very realistic. I just wanted to show all 3 of them. You would pick one style and go with it. And typically when I do this in a large scale project, there's a gem that I use called Friendly ID. And the gem gives me all sorts of extra helpers for working with permalinks, and you can add permalinks to like any aspect of your Rails website. So when I'm building Rails apps that I want to have permalinks, I use that gem, the Friendly ID gem.